Good afternoon for us in Italy. Today we are in Asia officially. We are definitely traveling the world, and I hope this experience is useful and interesting for our work. Now we had the program of the NextGen of the International Insolvency Institute regards the insolvency and restructuring time analysis in the time of COVID-19. For now, I'm Carlo Ghia. I give the floor to Annika Wolf for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Carlo, and welcome to the fifth of all seminars here with the NextGen webinars. My first goes to, thank you for the organizers. Carlo is one of the people who've initiated this great webinar series together with Francesca Borrigo and Domenico Benincasa, but also the support of Ivan Romo and Thiago Junquera and also Rosa Fertis. So the III is very pleased that the NextGens took the initiative in these unprecedented times to make sure that we know exactly what's been happening in different parts of the world. The first 4 seminars, we had 2 sessions on EMEA, 1 session on Latin America, and 1 session on the US. Now we travel from the US to basically to the other side of the world to see what's been happening in Asia and how Asian governments have reacted to COVID-19. So again, thank you for all of you who participated, for all of you who signed in. It's great pleasure for the III, and the executive committee is very pleased in how this went. So thank you again. Back to you, Carlo.
Thank you, Annika. So we passed from Asia, Germany, and now back to Italy, and then again to Thailand. But let me just introduce the situation here. First of all, thanks to Annika, to the III, to the International Insolvency Institute for giving us this great opportunity of realizing this webinar project. We, as Annika was saying, we bounced from Europe to US to Latin America. Now we are in Asia, and we are analyzing and focusing our analysis on insolvency matter and the impact of COVID-19 on restructuring proceedings and what will happen next. So the main arguments that we will now share during this panel are substantially on the initial impact of COVID-19 on single state. We will focus on Thailand, China, and Singapore in this session. The past situation, the actual situation, if states are still in contingency or going forward, the future, what measures will be taken. We will discuss a little bit about this, if there is any kind of opportunity. Thanks to our guru on blockchain, who is Jason Corbett, we will analyze also the impacts of COVID-19 on blockchain technologies and how blockchain technologies could give new opportunities to go on with economy and with these kind of issues. Future is not clear on how general life and economy will be after COVID-19. It is a moment of identical and economical crisis, but there are some values, even if it is important to underline, since we are seeing a lot of crazy stuff around the world. So it is important to say that values must be preserved in order to maintain a balance in economical and social system, and we must preserve it. On the economic side, it is important to focus the attention on the fact that the show must go on, and that, as Eric Danner was saying during the US session of the works, in the actual situation, probably it is understandable that there will be losers and winners, but there will be some opportunities, and these opportunities must be taken. So we will analyze now with our speakers all these kind of situation and issues. I make a presentation of the speakers. We have Jason Corbett from from Silk Legal, from a Thailand based law firm. Shuai Guo, who is a PhD candidate at Leiden Law School. He's finishing his final year, and soon he's going to be an assistant professor of law at China University of Political Science and Law in Beijing. Ming, who is a partner of the bankruptcy team at Junheb LLP. Aurelio Gurrea Martinez, assistant professor of law and head of the Singapore Restructuring Initiative at Singapore Management University. Now I have taken a lot of time to speak, so I leave to our speakers the floor, just saying that after the closing remarks, we will have a Q&A section. The Q&A chat can be used by the attendees to write questions, and we can select at the end, if we have time, some questions in order to answer. So now I give the floor to the first speaker, who is Jason Corbett. I just stop my slide and give him the possibility to share his slides. Okay, Jason, go in Thailand.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Let me just share the screen. Make sure it's the right screen. Okay, does it look good?
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. So, where's the next one? Title page is beautiful. Here we go. So, touching on what's happened in Thailand during COVID-19, the government really has not made, they've had some conceded efforts basically trying to help the economy and what's going on here, but they haven't done anything directly relating to bankruptcy. So it's been very mute on any kind of support for businesses. There's been some kind of window dressing, if you want to call it, on trying to basically kind of support the economy and kind of see us through the times. They've done some small kind of SME loans, which are kind of run by the commercial banks, which is allowing kind of up to 20% of people's credit lines to be kind of extended and kind of backed by the government. And they've also had kind of a handout for kind of the people that are in the informal economy. So this would be your taxi drivers, your ladies that work in massage shops, the guys on the street. So they basically thought there was about 3 million people that kind of fit within that that framework. Turns out they had 27 million applications. So they really underestimated how big the kind of the informal economy actually is. They end up basically giving money to about 14.9 million people in the end. So they're trying to basically rebudget that and work that out. So there really hasn't been, like I say, not much as far as you know, kind of direct government support of the businesses. The tourism sector here has taken a really big hit. Tourism basically accounts for about 20% of GDP of Thailand. And without the kind of the inbound tourism, it's definitely taken a mark on the economy. We're forecasting there's not going to be a rebound until November 2021, before we kind of see any kind of meaningful numbers coming back into the tourism industry. So I'll just leave that part by itself, and we'll get on to the more interesting things, which is kind of blockchain. So the contextualizing blockchain for COVID-19, it's all about transparency. So blockchain basically has that immutable ledger that cannot be edited or destroyed, which kind of creates the connectivity of data exchanges, which really kind of are needed for kind of a global outbreak. Having kind of commonality and platforms basically for countries to share information it's an incredible technology for that. So the use case is really good. And what we're seeing in the background is the ability for this technology to really kind of blossom if governments are able to use it right. So things like that are around privacy, tracking, resilience in supply chains, and such. So we've all kind of heard about contract tracing the last little bit. So contract tracing is using different types of technology that are able to provide regulators and health authorities with the information that they need to basically kind of contact and track back anytime people have come into contact with somebody that is exposed to COVID-19. Singapore was one of the first ones that actually kind of touched on this, where they created their application. The technology is not based on blockchain, it's more of a centralized system, but they're able to kind of control it with that. It's similar to what Apple and Google have been talking about. So if you have the new update for, I think it's iOS 13.5, and then I'm not sure what the Android one is, but basically Google and Apple is the first time they've collaborated of actually kind of creating a core change in the technology of the way their phones work. So basically your telephone has a Bluetooth beacon in it, which transmits its Bluetooth identification number. So when you come into contact with other Bluetooth devices, it will kind of ping off back and forth, and basically let people know that they've come in contact with people. So what they're able to do is somebody actually kind of tests positive, they're able to track back for the last 14 days of anybody that's come in contact with that individual. So there's a couple issues surrounding that. So Bluetooth goes through walls, so they're having kind of issues where people have been in different rooms and they're getting kind of they come up with that kind of false positive. So moving this kind of stuff onto a blockchain ledger is something that a couple of different kind of jurisdictions are looking at, and the ability to kind of move this data across borders as well is actually kind of something that is really kind of important. There's been talk of what they call an immunity passport. So this would be a secured health pass, essentially, using blockchain and cryptographic signatures that would allow people to start traveling again. So once a vaccine is developed, an individual in the government would be able to basically verify that this person is either had the disease or is exempt from it due to immunity, or that they have the proper vaccines, and they'd be able to basically freely travel. So there is an EU directive with a couple of different companies that are basically doing a consortium to develop this technology and the applications for it. So it's all about basically putting stuff within a blockchain, hooking it up to identification numbers and national identifications, and then having national health authorities be able to update the details of that ledger and be able to share that information on a permission basis to other people that are other regulators and such like that. They're able to basically look at it. So this is something that I think would be very interesting in the near term, and the technology definitely kind of permits it to be developed. So in other things we've seen around the world, the United Arab Emirates has been really kind of pushing the use of open government standards and a lot of technology, which is driven by a lot of blockchain systems. So they're able to authenticate official documents and certifications. They're able to do a variety of kind of online services, which usually would have to have like an in-person service. So in the era of COVID-19, where people are trying to socially distance, the technology works really good. So they have all these kind of different digital channels where government services are being delivered by using the systems. Identification system in Singapore, that's the Trace Together I mentioned earlier, which is the community-driven approach to basically have the proximity information for where people are using the Bluetooth technology. So it aims to basically map out the individuals' infective areas to help basically serve the health departments better. And in Italy, there's been some news around kind of blockchain expertise to verify sources of information. This is around kind of correct news and also kind of fake news, which helps to basically exacerbate any kind of contagions and such. So these are some of the examples that we're kind of seeing globally that blockchain is actually kind of solving, which is really kind of helping the recovery. Then this slide here basically talks about stablecoins. So there's a push within crypto to basically have a digital representation of a dollar. So there's various things called like there's USDT, which is Tether, USDC, which is Circle, which are some of the kind of the coins that are out there. These tokens basically are backed to and pegged to the US dollar, or other things such as a basket of gold or different types of currencies. So China, the United States, Australia, and a couple of different countries have basically been kind of looking around, how can we actually, take our money and actually kind of digitize it so we don't have to actually deal with physical money. In China, back in January, they were finding that the transmission of actual kind of physical currency. They were finding COVID-19 viruses on those, the actual bills themselves, so they were sanitizing the bills as they were going into circulation. So removing the physical, if you want to call it dirty money, and using something that is basically easily transferable and traceable is something that really kind of makes things good. These kind of the three different types are kind of your fiat, and there's other kind of crypto stable. I won't get into that. I don't know why my guy put that on there. So it's there was a big kind of push around this the last little bit, where kind of actually central banks are trying to basically look and investigate how to actually digitize their money. So I will stop it there, and because my time is running out, yeah, we can continue.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. We will have probably the time to speak about these issues in the Q&A section, but be prepared, because I want to ask you something about the development of startups on this side, and if there is any possibility to develop a business on these matters. On the other side, now we pass from Thailand and we go to China. We have split the intervention of China in two. So we have Shuai Guo for first, and then we will have Ming. So I give the floor to China, to Shuai. Go, Shuai.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. And let me share my screen. It's okay, like you can see it. Sorry, Carlo, you are muted.
Yeah. Needed to go with the presentation. Sorry about that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's working. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think it's very nice to be able to speak to people around the world from the different time zones. And thank you for III for hosting this webinar. So next we are going to speak about China. So Ming and I will split our parts on China. And I will first discuss the general social, economic, and legal status quo of China and the wide range of business-related reforms taken here. And Ming will focus on insolvency-related matters. So as a general observation, the situation here in China has been going well since late February. You can see from the graph that since late February, the number of cases being significantly dropped. The city of Wuhan, where the first COVID-19 case was reported, went into full lockdown on 23rd January, and the lockdown was lifted on 8th of April, like almost 2 months ago. Other cities in China went through partial lockdown, mostly social distancing, and the situation has been gradually improving since late February as the case being dropped by then. In terms of economic activities in China, the resume of economic activities also happened starting from late February. So from my observation, I think the impact on the economy is real, but intermediate, not that much. So given the impact on the Chinese market, the central government lists two major objectives and measures taken. First, protecting the employees and keeping the unemployment rate at a low level. Second, encouraging enterprises to resume business and assisting the distressed entrepreneurs. So as a general framework, no substantive law has been amended due to COVID-19. Instead, previous existing rules apply, taking into account the characteristics of COVID-19. For example, in contract law, COVID-19 is explained on the Chinese law as an event constituting force majeure. For protecting the employees, measures are taken, such as people who get affected or are put in quarantine cannot be laid off or are insured with minimum wage. Employees may choose to work from home, and companies must ensure a safe and healthy working environment, for example, periodically sanitizing the working place. However, companies may negotiate with employees to reduce salaries so that the companies suffering financial difficulties can survive and employees can keep their jobs. From the business side, there are tax incentives and financial measures. For tax incentives, there are like tax reduction, exemption, or tax refund. Similarly, there are rent-based exemption For example, state-owned properties must provide a 3-month exemption, and private properties who provide exemption or deferral are entitled to tax refund or tax reduction. For financial matters, the central government and the central bank, the People's Bank of China, inject money directly to the market, and the commercial banks encouraged to relax the terms and conditions of loan agreements. It should be noted that most commercial banks here in China are state-owned banks, so they follow the policies of the central government, even though sometimes the policies are called recommendations. Apart from government matters, the judicial system also intends to help entrepreneurs. So the Supreme Court of the People's Republic of China published 31 representative cases that demonstrate how courts can help the economy back in track and protect the businesses. Among them, 8 are insolvency-related cases. So I summarized 4 characteristics of the 31 cases. The first is the courts in China speed up the hearing process so that the parties are not tied with lawsuits and can resume business more swiftly. Many courts also turn to online platforms to hear cases. The second, the courts resolve disputes involving business that provide essential services such as food production, food delivery, and medical equipment production and services, for the purpose of ensuring the steady provision of these essential services. The third one is courts act as mediators and help parties reach a settlement agreement. For instance, injunctions may be lifted, which could provide more liquidity for enterprises. For another, banks may extend the repayment period so to ease the pressure on enterprises. And last one is courts facilitate restructuring proceedings. Courts are inclined to help business to reach a restructuring plan with creditors so that they can resume business and keep the employees. For example, there was a medical equipment manufacturing company that went into trouble, and the court acted as a mediator and helped the company and the creditors reach a settlement agreement so they can continue making medical equipments, which is quite essential in the time of COVID-19. My final point touches upon the digital ID Jason just mentioned. There is a similar matter here in China, so we have this kind of a digital health code. For people who get a green code, they can go almost anywhere. And for people who get a yellow code, they're prohibited or restricted to go outside. For people who get a yellow code are people who fly from abroad within 14 days, who live in the high-risk areas, or who have connection with someone who has been diagnosed with the infection of COVID-19. So I noticed there's a Q&A already about disputation about whether this matter can violate, for example, privacy law. But for me, at least from a business side of point of view, entrepreneurs are more comfortable to resume business and hire workers who have a green code. So this is maybe some controversial matter, but I think to some point it's beneficial for the businesses. So basically, that's a general description of what is happening in China, and I will give the floor to Ming next to discuss more in detail about insolvency-related matters. Yes, thank you. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you, Shuai. And hello, everyone. And so I will talk about the measures from Chinese courts dealing with the COVID-19 from the insolvency perspective. And actually, from the February to May 2020, there are 3 appealings from the Chinese Supreme Court. There are issued guiding appealings concerning the proper trial of civil cases involving the COVID-19, and notice of strengthening and regulating the online litigation work. And the third one, the appealings on promoting the efficient trial of the bankruptcy cases. So under the 3 appealings, each actually have some measures for the complaints. So I will talk one by one. For the guiding appealings, in which the third part specifically stipulates the trial of the bankruptcy cases involving the convoluted lighting. So I summarize the highlights under the guiding opinions into 4 parts. The first one is that if the court, before the court accepts the bankruptcy application from the creditor or the debtor or the liquidation committee, the court should guide the creditors and the debtors to resolve the debt crisis out of court by way of like the mediation, reorganization, pre-reorganization. And so in order to achieve the early rescue of the enterprise, and the first part. And the second point is that the court should determine the cause of bankruptcy according to the law carefully, which means the court should distinguish in the whether the enterprise, the insolvency caused by the COVID-19 or the lockdown measures due to the COVID-19. If it's yes, the court cannot decide to accept the bankruptcy application only based on the cash flow and the balance sheet according to the PRC bankruptcy law. And the court should also review the company's continuing operation ability and its industry future. It means if the company still can run its business and also the industry future of this company is still good. And usually the court may encourage the debtors and the creditors to sit out of court and do not actually accept the application of the bankruptcy case against this enterprise. Yeah, basically this is the second point. And the third point, under the guiding opinions, it extends the statutory period for submitting the reorganization plan, and also like the creditors to declare the claim, and holding creditors meetings, and holding hearings according to the specific situations. It means for each kind of act, they may like have some delayed period. For example, for the reorganization plan, it may, generally speaking, according to the PRC law, it will have like 6 months plus the 3 months, starting from the court accept the restructuring case. And under the COVID-19, according to the guiding opinions, they may have another additional 6 months to submit the reorganization plan. And the fourth highlight is to maintain to the maximum possible extent the capability of the data to continue its operation and give the full play to the benefits of the financial and common benefit stage, and provide the funding support for the data to continue its operation. Basically, this point means it encourages the financial institutions to fund the debtors in the restructuring cases, and in order to let them to resume their business. And this is the first appealings from the Chinese court. And the second rules, that's the notice of strengthening and regulating the online litigation work. So in this notice, there are 2 highlights I think you may pay attention to. The first one is relevant parties can carry out online litigation activities. For example, that the debtors and the creditor can actually file the bankruptcy cases online, or file your objection online, and which is very convenient for the parties. And the second point is to in order to prevent the negative influence on the judicial efficiency and the unnecessary litigation burden for the parties. And according to this notice, and it says the court should examine the application materials, means the filing documents within the 7 days upon the court receipt of the filing documents. And also, the court should no longer request parties to submit the original paper paper documents in order to speed up the judicial process. And for the online filing services, there are a couple of platforms the parties can choose. There are like China Mobile Micro Court, and there are like litigation service network, and also we have like 12368 litigation service hotlines. And also in China, we have like a platform by the by Supreme Court, and it is from currently, it means each bankruptcy cases should have the public notice in that website. So which is very convenient for the relevant parties together with the investors, and they can find the useful information there. And also for in order to facilitate the online filing, and the courts should at all levels should, first to improve the online handling procedures and online litigation procedures. And second, they should develop and issue the convenient and feasible online litigation operating guidelines with the comprehensive contents and clear guidelines, and people can follow the rules and to do the online filing easily. And the third appeal is related to promoting the efficiency trial of bankruptcy cases. There are two highlights we may pay attention to. The first, they holding the creditor meetings through the network. And currently, we have a lot of like big cases, also together with the small cases, conducted the creditors meetings through the network. And also we have like very specific measures to ensure the online creditor meetings go well. Like first, the administrators play a very important role during the online creditor meetings. They will prepare all the materials before the creditor meetings and submitted to the deregulated online platform, and then the creditors can actually download the documents by themselves. And the second, they will regulate the meeting procedure rules. And third, they will clarify the application scope for delayed voting. And the fourth, they will like strengthen the technical support, which actually very helpful for our big cases. Sometimes there are like over 1,000 creditors in the meeting. And the last one related to under the appeals is related to the fast trial mechanism for simple cases in bankruptcy and compromise procedures. And it means if the cases are applied the fast trial mechanism, so it should be closed in 6 months upon the court accept the bankruptcy application. And how to define the simple cases? It means like the property is very clear, and the dates are clear, and there is no like, it's not, the data, there is no litigation arbitration related, and the data is not a listed company, is not like a financial institution, and there is no cross-border issues. Yeah, that basically that's some reasons the court should consider before.
I think we are losing Ming. Connection. She was finishing, but I think that we. Oh, okay. Ming, are you over there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay. You were closing your presentation. I was seeing from the PowerPoint presentation that substantially you were closing with the fast trial mechanism for simple cases and 6 months. I'm seeing your image, so the connection probably is not so good at this moment. I think we caught you back, but now it's time to pass to Singapore, which is quite interesting because Singapore is actually a happy place, I think, in this crisis situation. but Aurelio Gurrea will for sure clarify everything regarding Singapore. And also make a comparison. We were chatting this morning about this. Please, Aurelio, go and hit the fireworks.
Thank you so much, Carlo. So first of all, I would like to thank the III and all my colleagues in the NextGen program. So Annika, Carlo, Ivan, Rosa, Thiago, and many others for making this exciting webinar possible. So as Carlo mentioned, I'm going to provide a brief overview about what Singapore has done and how what we have done in Singapore is compared to what other jurisdictions have done to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. So basically, I would like to start by mentioning that Singapore has implemented a very comprehensive response. So it's not only a financial or economic response, and it's not only a legal response. So it has been a very coordinated response. So on the one hand, we have enacted a COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act, and the main purpose of the act is to provide a breathing space for companies and debtors affected by the COVID-19 situation. So that's why this breathing space has been defined by the minister as a legal circuit breaker. But during this breathing space, companies still and debtors still are subject or could be subject to legal action. So for example, involuntary insolvency petitions by the creditors, enforcement actions, etc. So that's why one of the main purpose of this COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act is, first of all, to suspend most of these actions by creditors and by many other counterparties. So there are some restrictions to make sure that debtors are not using these measures opportunistically, but that's the basic idea, to try to suspend the ability to terminate contract and the ability to enforce claims against debtors affected by the COVID-19. And it has a particular focus on SMEs and some contracts, particularly in the tourism industry, aviation, restaurants, etc. But the law basically covers contracts and insolvency in particular. I will focus in a minute on the insolvency related measures that the COVID-19 Act includes. But the legal response is not enough. So we have the breathing space, but in the meantime, companies still face fixed costs. They still have to pay for the salaries. So that's why what the government has done is, along with the legal response, to implement a major economic response that has involved so far almost 20% of our GDP. So it's almost 100 billion Singapore dollars. And this money includes subsidies for wages, and depending on the industry, for example, airlines, the government is subsidizing 75% of the salaries of the employees in these industries. For food and beverage industries is 50%. So depending on the industry, the wages are subsidized more or less. Then also another important economic response is government supported loans for companies and also cash payouts. So that's why the whole idea is to try to provide this legal circuit breaker, but because companies and debtors have to survive in the meantime, that's why that has to be done in conjunction with an effective economic response. So in terms of insolvency legislation, including the COVID-19 Act, so basically we have restricted creditors' rights to initiate insolvency proceedings, and we have done that by increasing the quantitative threshold required to prove that the debtor is unable to pay debts. And it has been increased from 10,000 to 100,000 Singapore dollars. And also the statutory period to respond to the demands by the creditors has been increased from 21 days to 6 months. Also, we have suspended the liability for wrongful trading for new debts, provided that those debts are part of the debtor's ordinary course of business. Also, because the COVID-19 Act includes some moratorium against legal actions initiated by the creditors. That's why in the package of insolvency reforms, we have also included an extension of the look-back period for avoidance actions. Because if a debtor enjoys a moratorium for 6 months, for example, what happens if after 2 or 3 years, the debtor initiates an insolvency proceeding, and therefore the insolvency practitioners cannot avoid some harmful transactions that took place before this look-back period. So that's why if the debtor enjoys the moratorium provided in the COVID-19 Act, then that period of the moratorium will serve as an extension of the look-back period for avoidance actions in insolvency. And also, and this is very important, some not strictly insolvency reform, but insolvency related, we have implemented this pre-insolvency moratorium, which is basically what I've mentioned about the inability to terminate certain contracts, the inability to initiate enforcement actions subject to some restrictions against the debtor. So that's why these measures serve as pre-insolvency mechanisms. And by implementing these pre-insolvency mechanisms, what the law is indirectly doing is also to encourage debtors and creditors to negotiate. And this is particularly important to try to facilitate workouts. And this is particularly important because we don't want to collapse the judicial system in Singapore and in any other country around the world. So that's why one way to avoid this collapse of the judicial system is by facilitating workouts. And in fact, in Singapore, as in many other countries around the world, these workouts are relatively easy to achieve. And particularly in Singapore, many of our companies have concentrated debt structures. So in other words, it's very relatively easy to put together all the creditors and to coordinate the actions of those creditors with the debtors to try to reach an agreement. Also, we have many small and medium-sized enterprises, which makes these workouts also much easier. And also there are many repeated players because Singapore is a relatively small country. So that's why some creditors might have businesses with the controlling shareholders, with the managers, with the corporate group. So that's why it is much easier to try to reach those workouts in places or countries with this type of repeated players. So, but is insolvency law the solution? Well, I don't think it is. Again, this is a comprehensive response, what is needed to try to avoid the harmful effect of the COVID-19 crisis and to try to keep the economy afloat. But insolvency law can definitely help, particularly for some companies. And why is that? Well, because if we go back to the basics of insolvency law, what is the purpose of a role and the role of insolvency law and the role of the law of corporate organizations? First of all, to avoid the destruction of value or to minimize the destruction of value. And that is done by stopping creditors from enforcing their claims, the moratorium or automatic stay. So once the company is insolvent, some suppliers, some employees might want to abandon the firm. So that's why an insolvency response to that is to provide priority, maybe to post-petition suppliers, to post-petition employees, etc. So that's why all of these insolvency responses seek to avoid this destruction of value. And then also the second main purpose of the law of corporate organization is to facilitate the financial restructuring. And this is done by providing the adequate forum supervised by reliable third parties, the judge, insolvency practitioners, etc., by changing the rules existing outside of bankruptcy. So now we only require a majority or a qualified majority of the creditors in order to approve an organization plan. But then insolvency is not the panacea. There are some weaknesses and some limitations. So can the judicial system, for example, absorb the weight of insolvency cases? Also, are those functions really achieved? Because in some countries, it's not the case of Singapore, but in some countries, the insolvency system sometimes may do more harm than good because the judiciary might be maybe inefficient, and that's why companies can literally die during the procedure. So that's not the case in Singapore, but it's something to consider in other jurisdictions. So insolvency law also may not be the most appropriate solution for some particular debtors, particularly micro and small firms. So that's why we might need some insolvency responses, which are actually those that I just mentioned. And just to conclude, if we compare what Singapore has done with the solution adopted by other jurisdictions, we can see that actually Singapore has done most of these solutions existing out there. So we have restricted creditors' right to initiate insolvency proceeding, like Australia and like other jurisdictions. We don't have a duty to file for bankruptcy. This is a crazy idea existing in many countries in continental Europe mainly, but not very much elsewhere. So we don't have that. That doesn't apply. We have suspended the liability for wrongful trading. This also has been adopted in Australia, in the UK, and other jurisdictions. We have implemented some type of pre-insolvency moratorium against legal actions and termination of contracts. We are promoting and facilitating workouts through a variety of formal and informal mechanisms. Also, some countries, particularly in Latin America and continental Europe, have this idea of the recapitalize and liquidate rule. If the company's net assets fall below a certain percent of the company's legal capital, we don't have that in Singapore. That doesn't apply. We have significantly increased the use of electronic communications for judicial proceedings in general, but of course for insolvency proceedings as well. Amendments of our avoidance actions rules. Also, facilitation of rescue financing. Well, that doesn't apply strictly because we already have a system of rescue financing. In our reform in the past years, we have replicated the system of DIP or rescue financing existing in the US. So that's why we already have that in place. A special rule for small companies, not in insolvency in particular, but we have implemented that in the COVID-19 Act in the pre-insolvency scenario. And this is something that many countries are considering. For example, Colombia has been the latest one. Yesterday, Colombia and Latin America announced a new package of insolvency reforms, including special rules for small companies, which is particularly important for countries with this type of firms. Also, new measures to reduce the length of insolvency proceeding. Well, we haven't implemented that. Suspension of subordination of shareholder loans. That doesn't apply to Singapore. Again, this crazy idea is mainly from continental Europe and Latin America. And also the suspension of debtors' right to initiate insolvency proceeding. We haven't adopted that, fortunately, in my opinion, and this has been a solution proposed in India, for example. So that's why insolvency law can help, I think so, and can help ex ante to facilitate the negotiation and workouts, and it can be helpful ex post, particularly for some companies, to preserve value and facilitate the financial restructuring. But insolvency law is not the panacea. So that's why any legal or insolvency reform, I think, should be adopted in conjunction with other responses, which is exactly what Singapore has done. So there are still some challenges ahead, but I think we will be able to overcome those challenges, particularly because again, it has been a very coordinated and comprehensive response. So hopefully it can help minimize the harmful economic effect of the COVID-19 situation. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Aurelio. It is incredible. It is very interesting, this kind of analysis. Thank you for focusing on Singapore, but also on making this kind of comparison, because it is important, and this is the scope of the project, to make comparisons between various systems and the current situation. Now, before going to the Q&A, I've seen that all the questions have been already answered in the Q&A section, but we will have a couple of minutes in order to discuss a little bit about, to sum up all the issues that arose from this session. I give the floor to Ivan Romo, who is the chair of the NextGen program of the III of the International Insolvency Institute, who is a good friend, and we have shared this program from the beginning. So, Ivan, up to you in Mexico.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you all, guys. This has been very amazing. It's very comforting to see you all doing these different things from the same issue. It has been a lot of problems all around the globe to address this situation, and we have been hearing from the US, the Latin America, Europe, and now from Asia, how the countries are trying to address this and how they are trying to handle. Carlo, I want to thank you because all of this was a good effort handling by you. And on behalf of the NextGen program of the III, I want to thank all the panelists that have been participating with us in the webinars and all the persons that have been attending. Thank you so much. Your audio, Carlo.
I retake the floor just to conclude and have a little bit of some kind of thoughts. We have talked about all the situations, and we have dealt with technology, blockchain, the use of technology in courts, the necessity of speeding up the procedures of restructuring and insolvency, and of litigation cases in general. So since all the questions have been answered, I just need to sum up a little bit, and maybe some of you can answer to this question. Here in Italy, we have a strange situation. Now we are starting phase 2. Everything is going well, let's say. Probably there will be the only we have a lot of issues regarding the money that needs to come. That the money has been programmed to be given to enterprises and to companies and to SMEs. But we have a lot of problem of liquidity given to them in this actual period. So my question is that, and my worries are taking what Aurelio told before, are that probably there will be a wave of insolvency procedures, restructuring procedures. Maybe technology could help. We will need to have some places where to deal out of court, probably, because courts don't have the capabilities to make all this kind of work. The workflow that will be generated, I think, will be very, very huge. So we will need to have creditors to be interested in all these kind of restructuring procedures and all these kind of bankruptcy procedures. So my question is how technology can help in this. We have also generational passages to make. So it is very important. Do you feel that technology can use help on this side and on out of courts proceedings or not? Who wants to answer? Feel free.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I think a lot of the technology has already been here for years, and it's just a matter of adapting our practices and basically kind of the social norms and what's kind of acceptable kind of our daily lives by using technology to these kind of new things. Like, Zoom, Teams, electronic court systems. It's something that's not new. It's been around for years, but I think people have just been in their ways. And I think kind of post-COVID-19, it's going to be interesting to revert back to these days because it probably is more efficient. I think we'll probably see less travel. We're going to see kind of less face-to-face meetings and just more kind of efficiency of time and remote working. So it's one of these kind of interesting things. I think one of the getting around kind of the social norms of actually going to a court and having those proceedings there, I think that stuff is going to become not so important in the future. I just want to highlight it's not insolvency related, but I know Singapore did have a case last month where they did a kind of an online, I believe it was actually by Zoom, superior court judgment where they actually gave a death sentence to a drug trafficker by video conference. So it's probably one of these things, it's like something like that with the gravity of sentencing to somebody death over a video conference, actually having them the chance to basically appear in a courtroom does kind of change those social norms. So I think it's going to be kind of an interesting one going forward. Okay, thank you, Jason. Yes, it will be very important. We will need persons that are capable to use it. This is the question. Otherwise, all the technology and platforms that we have are something that are not useful to do with, to use in this moment. Another question regarding technology: is there any opportunity? I mean, Jason was saying that we have opportunity to
to use technology in different ways. So I think that maybe cutting the costs, technology may be used to cut the costs in enterprises, in companies. So in a restructuring procedure, maybe one of the deals and one of the main arguments could be this. We have a lot of sectors that will be hit by this technology facility. I mean, I think maybe real estate could be one of the sectors that could be have a deep impact on this, because if people can work from remote, companies cannot don't need to rent or to lease offices maybe. So what do you think about this situation? Ming, Aurelio, Shuai. Aurelio.
Okay, happy to go. Yeah, so basically, I think that technology is changing everything. It was already changing everything before the COVID-19 crisis, but what the COVID-19 crisis is doing is to accelerate that process. So that's why the answer to your question is yes. I think we will need to find some solution for those problems and those insolvencies that actually might not be directly related to COVID, but more related to the digitalization of the entire economy, and particularly the increasing use of technology in certain industries. So that's why, yes, I think that we will need to be aware of those changes and implement some appropriate responses, not only from a legal perspective and economic perspective, but also in terms of, for example, training employees in order to have, the population prepared for what's going on. So that's why capacity building will become a major issue in the following years. And in fact, Singapore is already investing a lot on that. So we have, many subsidies precisely for people interested in increasing their capabilities in technologies and getting this type of education.
Okay, thank you, Aurelio. Okay, I think it's time to close, because we have the 60 minutes and we are closing. I just want to thank everybody to participate in this webinar, all the speakers. I need to thank also Deborah Grasgreen and Annika Wolf for giving support, and to Brandy Gaiman who gave us support technologically with all the webinars. This has been, this is the conclusive phase. So it's the conclusive phase of the webinar project. We hope to improve it, and we hope to go on with these confrontations by web, hoping that one time we will meet physically in some place, speaking and sharing information also physically, which is always important, and drinking some wine together, it's always good. So I hope to be with you very in a short time. In the meanwhile, I thank you all. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to the III for giving us this opportunity. Stay tuned, because we will probably go on. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.